Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that helps you cut through all that information noise, really getting to the essential knowledge you need, and fast. Today, we're challenging something we all kind of like to believe about ourselves, that we're these logical, rational creatures always acting in our own best interest. We're diving deep into why we actually do things that, on the surface, make absolutely no sense. We're calling this one the wild logic behind seemingly irrational human actions.
And just to be clear, our goal isn't really to find flaws. It's more about understanding the amazing, efficient shortcuts our brains use machinery that often picks speed over, perfect accuracy.
That's exactly it. That's the core tension, isn't it? For, generations, economic models assumed we were all this homo economicus, perfectly rational. But behavioral science, well, it's spent decades showing that person just doesn't exist. We're wired for shortcuts. Psychologists call them heuristics. And these heuristics, while they're super fast, they lead to these predictable systematic errors. Those are the biases that really shape our decisions. Right. And what really jumped out from the sources we looked at is just how easily our conscious, logical thinking gets, hijacked. Whether it's just how a choice is phrased or maybe these echoes from our evolutionary past, the context often seems to matter way more than the actual content. So let's dig into that. How do these contextual things immediately mess with our claim to pure rationality?
Well, the first big one, when you talk about the gap between old theory and how we really are, is the framing effect. It's absolutely fundamental in behavioral economics. Basically, how choices are presented to you can completely change what you decide, even if the underlying facts are identical.
It's incredible how much just the words matter, like that classic experiment, right? Where researchers ask people about having surgery. When they frame the outcome, positively describe it as a 90% survival rate, people were pretty willing to go for it.
Exactly. But then take the exact same situation, flip the frame to negative, call it a 10% mortality rate, and suddenly way fewer people wanted the surgery. Logically, it's the same thing. 90% survival, IS, 10% mortality. But the feeling, the reaction, totally different based on the frame.
And think about what that means for you listening right now. If simple words can shift decisions about, life-saving surgery, imagine the power that politicians or marketers wield. Calling something an estate tax versus a death tax. It's the same policy, but the name completely changes how people feel about it.
Right. And this vulnerability to framing, it often gets tangled up with our modern world, leading to something called the paradox of choice. We think we love having tons of options, right? More freedom, more choice sounds great. But the data, it actually shows that too much choice can be, paralyzing.
Oh, yeah, I remember that jam study. That really nailed it.
Yeah.
They set up a tasting booth. When they offered 24 different kinds of jam, people would taste a lot, sure, but very few actually bought any jam. But when they cut the selection down to just 6 jams, people bought way more. Too much choice led to, decision shutdown.
Exactly. Or even if they do manage to choose from that huge selection, they often end up feeling more regret later. That nagging feeling of, oh, what if I missed the best one? And this really highlights a key difference in how people approach decisions, which affects your happiness. Are you a maximizer?
What does that mean exactly, maximizer?
A maximizer is someone who feels compelled to find the absolute best possible option. They research everything, compare endlessly. But because finding the perfect best is often impossible, they frequently end up feeling kind of dissatisfied with their choice.
Oh, okay. As opposed to a
satisficer. That's someone who has criteria for what's good enough, finds something that meets those criteria, and then, chooses it and moves on.
And they're generally happier, right?
The research strongly suggests that, yes, satisficers tend to report higher levels of happiness because they aren't constantly tormented by the ghost of potentially better, unchosen options.
That makes sense. That constant search for the best sounds exhausting.
It can be. And that desire for immediate satisfaction, or maybe avoiding the pain of endless searching, leads us right into our next big irrational tendency. Our really weird relationship with time, specifically hyperbolic discounting.
Hyperbolic discounting. Okay, so that sounds like we're bad at valuing the future. Is that the temporal myopia thing, being short-sighted?
Precisely. It's our brain's strong preference for a smaller reward right now over a much bigger reward that's further down the road. Think about saving for retirement. Logically, mathematically, we know it's the smart move. The long-term payoff is huge. But our brain, especially the older parts, really struggles to connect with that future self. The 70-year-old version of me, it feels like a stranger.
So we prioritize the me right now.
Exactly. We discount the value of that future reward almost exponentially the further away it is. We'd rather have, say, $50 today than $100 in a year, even though rationally the wait is worth it. This is a huge reason why it's so hard to do things like quit smoking or start exercising. The effort, the pain is immediate. The reward, better health, way down the line just feels too abstract, too distant to be a strong motivator today.
Okay, so we've got framing, the paradox of too many choices, and discounting the future. Those seem like big traps in how we cause. Let's shift gears a bit. What about how we make judgments or estimate things? Like, how do we get probabilities so wrong? Let's start with the anchoring effect.
Anchoring, yes. This is where our first piece of information, even if it's totally random or irrelevant, heavily influences our final judgment or estimate.
Yeah.
We latch onto that initial value, the anchor, and then we just don't adjust away from it nearly enough.
The classic example is always the car salesman, right? Starts with this ridiculously high price.
Right. You know you won't pay that, but it sets that high anchor in your mind. So when they finally come down to a lower, but still maybe high price, it feels like a great deal compared to where you started.
It works, even if the anchor is completely meaningless, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And this is where it gets really weird. There were these amazing studies, Kahneman and Tversky did them. They'd ask people a question like, what percentage of African countries are in the UN? But before they answered, they had participants spin a wheel of fortune. You know, one of those wheels with numbers from 0 to 100, completely random.
Okay. So the wheel number shouldn't matter at all.
It shouldn't, but it did. People who landed on a low number on the wheel, say 10, gave significantly lower estimates for the UN percentage. And those who spun a high number, like 65, gave much higher estimates. That totally arbitrary number dragged their final judgment along with it.
Wow. So our brains just grab onto the first number they see?
Pretty much. And we do similar things when assessing risk, often using the availability heuristic.
Availability. So that's about what's easy to remember.
Exactly. We judge how frequent or likely something is based purely on how easily examples come to mind. If something is vivid, dramatic, recent, or gets a lot of media coverage, it feels more common than it might actually be.
Which explains why people worry more about things like plane crashes or shark attacks, right? Even though statistically they're incredibly rare.
Precisely. Those events are dramatic, they make headlines, so examples are readily available in our memory. We easily recall them. Meanwhile, we tend to underestimate the risk of common mundane killers like heart disease or, say, car accidents, because individual cases don't stick in the mind the same way. Our fear tracks media coverage more than actual statistical risk.
We're basically judging risk based on news headlines, not data.
Often, yes. And our intuition about randomness itself is also deeply flawed. This brings us to representativeness.
Representativeness.
Yeah.
That sounds like we expect things to look like our idea of what they should represent.
You got it. We have this built-in belief that random sequences should look random even over very short stretches.
Like the coin toss example. People think a sequence like heads, tails, tails is somehow more likely than, say, heads, tails.
Exactly. The first sequence feels more balanced, more representative of a 50-50 random process. But in reality, any specific sequence of 6 coin flips has the exact same tiny probability of occurring. HHTTT is just as likely as HTHTT.
And that ties into the gambler's fallacy too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The classic example. The roulette wheel lands on red 10 times in a row. You feel this overwhelming urge to bet big on black because surely black is due, right?
Yeah, it feels like it has to balance out.
But the wheel has no memory. Chance isn't a self-correcting process in the short term. Each spin is independent. The odds are still essentially 50-50 for red or black on the next spin, regardless of what happened before. We impose a pattern, a need for balance, where none exists.
Okay, so these are shortcuts in how we judge and estimate things. Let's go even deeper now. What about the really primal stuff? The deep programming we got from our ancestors that maybe hasn't caught up with, like modern life?
Oh, definitely. Let's start with emotional pain, specifically the pain of rejection. It turns out it's not just a figure of speech when we say rejection hurts. Brain imaging studies show that social rejection, being excluded, ignored, broken up with, activates the very same brain regions that process physical pain.
Yeah.
Like the anterior cingulate cortex lights up for both a stubbed toe and being dumped.
Wow. So that feeling of it being physically painful is real.
In terms of brain activity, yes. That's likely why social pain feels so overwhelming, so disproportionate sometimes. For our ancestors living in small tribes, being ostracized was incredibly dangerous, potentially a death sentence. So our brains evolved to treat social rejection as a serious threat, triggering a strong pain signal to make us prioritize fitting in and maintaining social bonds. That system is still running today.
And that ancient survival programming pops up elsewhere too, right? Like the startle reflex.
Oh, yeah. That huge involuntary jump when a door slams shut unexpectedly, or even just a loud stapler in a quiet office. Why such an extreme reaction to something harmless?
It's the caveman brain again.
It's the caveman brain. It operates on a better safe than sorry principle. A sudden loud noise could have meant a predator leaping or a rock falling back then. The reflex is instant react first, ask questions later. Your body flinches before your conscious mind even identifies the sound. Evolution hasn't quite updated the threat database to tell the difference between a jaguar and, a dropped book.
Logic catches up way too late.
Seconds too late. And we see similar ancient wiring in social signals, like blushing.
Yeah, going bright red when you're embarrassed or maybe even flattered. Why do we do that? It just seemed to make things more awkward.
It seems counterproductive, right? It's triggered by the sympathetic nervous system, the same system behind fight or flight. Blood vessels in the face dilate. One leading theory is that blushing evolved as an involuntary, honest signal of social awareness or appeasement.
Like saying sorry without words.
Sort of. By visibly showing shame, embarrassment, or even just heightened awareness of social scrutiny, you might be non-verbally communicating to the group something like, I recognize I messed up, or I acknowledge the social rules. It could be a way to quickly restore social harmony after a perceived misstep. It's an automatic, hard-to-fake signal.
Okay, so our internal wiring is definitely still running some old software. How does this affect how we see other people?
Well, one huge blind spot this creates is the fundamental attribution error. This is a big one in social psychology.
Fundamental attribution error sounds important.
It is. It's our strong, almost automatic tendency to explain someone else's behavior based on their personality or character, their internal traits, while downplaying or ignoring the impact of the situation or external factors.
Like if someone cuts you off in traffic, your first thought is, what a jerk. That person is so selfish.
Exactly. You immediately attribute the action to their fixed personality. They are a bad driver. They are inconsiderate. You rarely stop and think, maybe they're rushing to the hospital, or maybe they're lost and confused, or maybe they just made a mistake because they're stressed. We jump straight to judging their character.
But when we do the same thing,
Then it's different, isn't it? When we cut someone off, we know the context. Oh, I was running really late, or the sun was in my eyes, or my GPS suddenly rerouted me. We give ourselves the benefit of the situational doubt. We explain our own actions based on external factors.
we see their actions as character, our actions as circumstance.
That's a great way to put it. And this sort of lack of self-awareness, or maybe skewed self-awareness, also shows up in how we think about external influences. Like media. This is the third-person effect.
Third-person effect, so we think media affects them, but not me.
Precisely. We're often quite astute at noticing how advertising or political ads or even just social media trends seem to influence our friends, our family, or colleagues. We can see how it might shape their desires, their moods, their opinions. But when asked about ourselves, oh no, we tend to believe we're much less susceptible. We see ourselves as more rational, more critical, more immune to those subconscious, persuasive messages that clearly work on, other people.
Like we have this mental shield that others lack.
Exactly. It's a fascinating and very consistent bias. We underestimate the power of external messages on ourselves while readily seeing their impact on others.
Okay, so our brains are definitely running on some quirky, sometimes outdated logic. If we know about all these biases and shortcuts, are there ways to use logic maybe to get a bit more insight or even control?
Yes, absolutely. And some of the tools are quite surprising. For instance, consider language. Research has found something really interesting. When people have to make decisions, especially complex moral or financial ones, in a foreign language, one they aren't native in their choices often become more rational and systematic.
Wait, really? Using a language you're less comfortable with makes you more logical. That seems backward.
It does, right. But think about it. Your native language is deeply intertwined with intuition, emotion, cultural shortcuts. Decisions feel quick, almost automatic. But when you switch to a second language, you introduce what researchers call cognitive distance. You have to consciously think about the words, process the grammar, slow down.
So it forces you out of that fast, intuitive, emotional thinking.
Exactly. It engages the more deliberative, analytical part of your brain. The automatic, often biased gut reactions are dampened simply because you're working harder mentally just to understand the problem.
That idea of creating distance is really powerful. How else can we use it? maybe when dealing with difficult people. We talked about the fundamental attribution error.
Right. We can consciously work against that error by trying to generate situational explanations for others' behavior. But we can also use this understanding to deal with, say, aggressive or overly dominant behavior. Think about the logic of insecurity.
The logic of insecurity, meaning aggressive people are actually scared.
Often, yes, deep down, someone who constantly needs to brag about their achievements or put others down or demand constant validation, that behavior frequently stems from profound insecurity.
Oh.
It's overcompensation. They're acting big because they fear they're small. They're afraid of not being good enough or being overlooked or being seen as weak.
So realizing that can help you not take it so personally.
Precisely. It allows for what psychologists call cognitive diffusion. You separate the behavior from a personal attack. Instead of thinking, they're attacking me, you can reframe it as, wow, their insecurity must be really activated right now. It shifts your focus from feeling targeted to observing their internal struggle.
And can we use that diffusion technique on our own thoughts, especially the negative bias ones?
Absolutely. That's a core technique in therapies like acceptance and commitment therapy or ACT. It's about learning to look at your thoughts rather than from them.
How does that work in practice?
Well, let's say you have a persistent, harsh thought like, I'm a loser. Instead of automatically accepting that thought as a statement of fact, as reality, you practice rephrasing it internally. You say to yourself, I'm having the thought that I am a loser.
Okay. That adds a layer of separation. It's just a thought, not me.
Exactly. It acknowledges the mental event is happening, but it stops you from fusing your identity with the thought. It creates that crucial distance. And from that distance, you can then ask a more useful question. Is this thought helpful right now? Does believing this thought help me move towards the kind of life I want to live?
And if the answer is no,
Then you treat it like mental noise. You acknowledge it's there, maybe thank your mind for trying to protect you in its weird way, but you don't let it dictate your actions or define your worth. You let it pass by.
so if we pull all this together, what's the big picture? Humans aren't just random and irrational.
Not at all.
We're predictably irrational. We run on this kind of wild, ancient logic that's systematic. We get influenced by frames. We use these mental shortcuts built for speed, not necessarily modern accuracy. And we've got this deep psychological wiring from, well, the savannah.
That's a great summary. And understanding this isn't about beating ourselves up over our biases. It's really about gaining self-awareness. It's about recognizing that the very cognitive tools that helped our species survive and thrive, pattern matching, quick judgment, social sensitivity, are the same things that can trip us up in today's complex world. They're features, not just bugs, but features with unintended consequences sometimes.
Right. So that brings us to our final challenge for you, the listener. We know now that these external things, anchors, frames, even the language we use, can seriously change how we decide things. So take a moment and think. Is there some part of your own life, maybe a big financial choice you made, or a personal goal you're chasing, or even just a belief you've held for a long time, that might be anchored to something irrelevant from your past? Or maybe it's based on a faulty frame that someone else handed you. Can you identify just one personal irrational action or persistent thought pattern and try to trace back its hidden, maybe even wild logic? What's really driving it?